Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the wonderful ladies and gentlemen who are here. Welcome to another episode of the Sunday Stream. I know that many of you are just tuning in from Oren's stream, and I was very glad to be on. So if you are new to this channel or you're new to what I do, I cover a lot of the international relations and geopolitical side of things. So while we often get wrapped up in our domestic politics, as I like to say, the world doesn't pause, things still go on and still happen. So this is what I cover every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And so, with all that being said, today is the second part of my little forecast ideas for the new year. Since it's 2022, we're just into the second week. And I think that it would be very good for us to sort of start talking about what to expect in the year ahead and in future trends. Last week, we talked about some major hotspots that were happening. This includes Ethiopia, the issue in Ukraine, Taiwan, as well as parts in South America and the Middle East. So this time, we're going to start taking a look at some broader trends like the geopolitical side of things about great power politics. How is statecraft going to manage? And if you're new to all of that, then by all means, tune in and enjoy. There's plenty of fun things to happen, and there's some special knowledge on the study of amphibians towards the end. So let's get started. And if you guys ever have questions throughout the presentation or you want to poke my brain on something, I interact with chat quite often. So we can let's get started. So the agenda I had for today's discussion kind of goes as following about these 5 major areas that I think are going to happen and are probably going to continue to happen well after 2022 and beyond. So we'll be talking about the emerging multipolar world order, so sort of this collapse of what's been the policy of American unipolarity, as well as American triumphalism that sort of emerges after the fall of the Soviet Union. The discussion of hybrid warfare, whether it's the use of energy, information, or mimetic warfare, as well as the use of demographics and populations. Of course, the great powers, the issue of Russia, China, and the United States, and reference to a tragedy, of course, by John J. Mearsheimer. And then, of course, the discussion of the winds of change, so how people will perceive the power relationship between those 3 powers, what their interests are going to be around, how they'll be influenced by other powers, and the growing concept of European defense autonomy, or EDA. And then we'll take a look, not certainly last, but not certainly the least, the idea of the certain ongoing technological arms races, whether that's the issues of satellites, surveillance, cyberspace, and of course, kinetic weaponry. So these are a lot of the things that we'll sort of be taking a look at today and forecasting and taking an examination of the balance of powers. So let's begin. So the world order, we'll be talking about how it's becoming increasingly multipolar and the flaws of our current institutional alliances. I do think in 2022, as we begin to see the United States push itself not only on Eastern Europe, and of course there's the ongoing situation in Kazakhstan, but we'll be talking about that later this week. We're also seeing the ongoing trying to entangle the United States and keep this web of alliances within Southeast Asia going, whether it's the ongoing communication with the Quad, which is the United States, Australia, India, and Japan. But on top of this, it's going to see that there's some... It's not going to be as strong as it once realizes. The American policy of containment, which has been ongoing since about 1992, it has been described by a variety of geopolitical scholars and those who study foreign relations or have worked within the State Department, that the American grand strategy for the longest time has been the following, which has been to maintain the sort of economic system as it currently exists, which means patrolling the seas, enforcing international rules and regulations in the world order, which allows it to benefit itself through the existing supply chain. The second is to prevent the rise of a state to challenge itself economically or strategically on the world stage. And then the third part, which is sort of an extension of point 2, has been the prevention of a coalition of states and to ensure that the existing relationship through either NATO or through its existing alliances and trade does not defect or succumb to the influence or economic powers of another state or coalition. And as what we're currently seeing in the future has been what we will see in the future is just the fact that the United States is already beginning to witness this and is trying to put substantial pressure on European states in order to do so. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when in reference to Germany, especially when it comes to energy policy. But these are things since the United States pushes for it. And I think that as Russia continues to push on its aspects for energy, continues its ongoing but rather tenuous relationship with Russia in areas of defense and its natural gas pipelines, that we will see in 2022 sort of the realization that there is this growing multipolar world order and that the United States needs to begin to realize what's going to happen next. And when I refer to the United States, it's important to recognize that we're referring more so to the administration, we're referring to its government, its State Department, the various non-governmental organizations it works with, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, various things that happen in that area. These things will either start to see and make its rear its ugly head in this year, but I do think that this will be an ongoing trend in 2022 and beyond. But the second issue, of course, when it comes to those alliances is the issue of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and lifting up the curtain. So while NATO exists primarily, of course, it was the deterrent to the Soviet Union, it was a deterrent to the Warsaw Pact. It has been used as a way to contain what has been seen as a resurgent Russian power since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. We've seen rapid expansion eastward to include, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and now there has been ongoing pressure from this administration to have, President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to join the organization as well. But underneath the curtain of what is sort of the NATO or OTAN banner, as it's known in other languages, is that it doesn't go away institutionally. Of course, it will still serve as this broader spectrum of having the American strategic tripwire of Article 5, which, if one is attacked, all then are considered to be attacked and will respond, of course, in force. But what we're seeing underneath the curtain, and we will continue to see this trend ongoing, is that Europe is going to continue to engage in various bilateral agreements. Its various partners will engage. That way, it's not necessarily one NATO state going against another. It is the nation of France, for instance, engaging with the nation of Greece in order to sell, say, Rafale aircraft and fighters, along with providing them the selling of naval technology such as submarines, or upgrading and updating the technology in Greece's navy. While at the same time, there'll be ongoing bilateral military agreements and arms sales that we're currently seeing over the issue in the Mediterranean and over Cyprus, which is currently what we're seeing is the issue in regards to, of course, the Turkish Navy has been recently updated and modified through President Erdogan's term, but at the same time, he's also bought submarine detecting technology from the German military and the German government. So you're seeing a very European affair play out, while at the same time, all of these nations are a part of the NATO banner, and they are member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But on the side, they're engaging in these bilateral agreements. And as this increased talk of, European defense autonomy continues, and that the United States continues its focus towards Russia, that the rest of Europe and the rest of NATO member states may continue to pursue, and I do expect this to happen both in this year and beyond, the ongoing idea that bilateral agreements for defense, for trade, for military technology will continue, as not to disrupt the already tense situation diplomatically when it comes for the General Secretary of NATO to bring nations together, because you already have a problem with Turkey, which has bought S-400 missiles from the Russians. They continuously, have tense relationships with the European Union, whether it's over the issue of migration, democracy, or human rights. So again, we will see an increased focus on these bilateral agreements between individual nation states, while still maintaining their, membership and their payments towards the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But in the future, the other thing to consider as well is that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will also, bring rise to the fact that it has pushed certain nation states together in terms of defense, trade, and political alignment, which includes that of Russia and China. And one of the issues, though, I think we will see in 2022, especially as China continues to expand its Belt and Road Initiative, that you will indeed see the relationship between Russia and China begin to cool. There are various parts of the Eurasian, the region. I want to call it the continent or subcontinent, but I'll be specific. The Eurasian subcontinent, both of the former Soviet republics, of the Middle East, including, Afghanistan, Iran, trying to get closer and closer to the Mediterranean and the Caspian Sea. China has been heavily invested in this. And currently, right now, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, the government that is ran by the Taliban, has encouraged increased cooperation with the Chinese for investment in routing out terrorists, because in eastern Afghanistan, what is known as the Wakhan Corridor, which borders China, has been the issue of having certain Islamic extremist groups from the Xinjiang province, primarily Uyghurs, having territory in that area to smuggle arms and drugs out of the country. All of which, right, puts it at uneasy for Russia to see this large and powerful government, more or less, get involved in the Middle East, which is essentially Russia's backyard, politically speaking. At the same time, right, we're already seeing an increased interest in the situation that is unfolding in Kazakhstan, because that area has a significant amount of fissile material, particularly that of plutonium and uranium, which China, of course, has been trying to shift their energy resources away from natural gas and coal towards the greater production of nuclear reactors, which is why recently we have been seeing a lot of reports of rolling blackouts within the country, because China has been trying to move slowly off of coal and towards its increased nuclear weapons production, all of which is taking place right at the same time. So this relationship is going to cool, especially because while Russia has not definitively committed towards defense and military exercises with the Chinese, they have in the past, but there is no definitive set agreement between the two. And at the same time, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative continues to expand. They do have a desire to reach either access to the Persian Gulf, the Caspian Sea, and on top of that, the Mediterranean, which right now Russia is already trying to maintain a position within the Mediterranean, primarily through its warm water port in Syria and elsewhere. So there's definitely a lot that's going on here. And I do think that in the meantime that we will see the, underneath the curtain, NATO will see its ongoing defenses, sort of get tense politically as their nations pursue their own interests. But I do think that we may see the emergence of sort of this three-power way between the, Chinese government, the Russians, and the United States, and it currently stands. But Peter Korig sent a super chat asking a really good question for $4.99. Thank you so much. I don't really pocket any of this money, Pete, and I'll explain at the end. But you asked, do you agree that we desperately need a new security approach / agreement between Western Europe and the Slavic East? NATO is outdated. Thoughts on a framework? Well, Pete, that's actually something that I'm working on, but I would agree with you that the current way that NATO operates, I do think, is outdated, because you are trying to put various parts of Eastern and Western Europe, all of these states with various geopolitical and energy interests and security interests of their own, not to mention the various ethnic tensions that underlie these countries, all within this framework of, we all defend one defends all. And it probably wouldn't operate particularly well. And we're already seeing that sort of bubble its tensions underneath the surface. And in fact, this was something that George Friedman, of all people, talked about in 2016 in Flashpoints, the emerging crises in Europe. I definitely do think that we need a new framework for it between the East and the West. I do think that towards Western Europe, I think that there should be a stronger emphasis on European defense autonomy. There is, for instance, France and Germany have their own international interests that do not align with ours. France has some investments in manufacturing in Iran, for example. Germany does have an energy relationship with Russia that we've tried and are succeeding, at least at the current moment, to sort of put a chokehold on when it comes to pipelines and liquid natural gas. As towards the East, the question becomes, what is the American objective in Eastern and Slavic Europe, right? And this is something that I am definitely working on. So for those of you who are sort of aware of the February event in Nashville, and we talked about this last week, my entire presentation is going to be about the foreign policy of the next regime. So what would be a better grand strategy? What would be a new grand strategy? And the NATO question will definitely be adopted, Pete. So after the event, I will be posting my speech and talking about what we want to, what the United States should be doing if it were more realist and resilient in its foreign policy. But yeah, I mean, this is an important issue, I think, as well, when it comes to how our relationships with these nations change. Hunger asks, will Turkey flip to Russia or China? And if so, will they leave or be kicked out of NATO? This has been a question that's been asked for a while, Hunger, and I'll keep it up actually. Um, so, for instance, Turkey and Russia, of course, historically from centuries, right? You have the Eastern question, you have the Ottoman and the Russian Empire, is right. But at the same time, Turkey has been trying to use this as political leverage against the United States and the West. In particularly along the lines that they've bought Russian S-400 missiles, they've assisted in providing the Russians military intelligence when it comes to issues along the Turkish border or stopping migrants. So I'm very unlikely to see them flip just for historical reasons. China would love to have investments in that area, but I do think that in the interim, at least for 2022, in the next 10 to 15 years, that we will not see an exit of Turkey out of NATO. For the longest time, the Americans have viewed Turkey as sort of their gateway into the Middle East. And, as Erdogan has clamped down on his government, and there's already ongoing situations in Turkey with their economy. I mean, inflation is up somewhere to 30%. There are breadlines and protests. We may have to wait until the 2023 election to see what really is going to change out of Turkey's foreign policy. This is definitely something that we would have to look towards. Although, considering the last time that Erdogan was almost ousted and that the information had revealed, right, that there was a strong sort of American influence or presence, like the leader, that was accused of leading this coup ideologically, has asylum in the United States, there's definitely concern that there may be potential for color revolution. And in fact, we'll be talking about color revolution in one of these slides coming up as well. But I don't think that they'll be kicked out of NATO or be flipping to the Chinese or Russians anytime soon. The foreign aid and the issues there, I think they'll still pursue. And while they have been kicked out of the F-35 program, I don't think that we're going to be seeing them leave sort of that Western sphere of influence, or at least in terms of money, anytime soon. Tomb of Arminius asks, any thoughts on the expansion of the Five Eyes intelligence agreement to include other countries like Japan and Germany? I don't know if that's coming or if it's already happened. I would have to do a little more research, but I would not be surprised if in the meantime, if there is ever going to be an expansion of the Five Eyes agreement, considering that New Zealand has gotten incredibly close to China and they've talked about sharing intelligence, and then Jacinda Ardern had to do a really quick backtrack and talk about human rights. I think Japan would be the most likely if there was ever going to be an expansion of that agreement, especially because we've increased our defense, engagement when it comes to Japan. The Chinese and Japan have already opened up a direct diplomatic line of communication, similar to how the U.S. and Russia do when it came to the Cold War, in order to mitigate conflict and to discuss the goings-on. I do think that if it were to happen, that it would definitely be Japan over Germany, because Germany, of course, does have a vested energy interest in there that the U.S. has been trying to strangle. So that would be my thought, if that were to be the case. But that's a good question, and that would probably warrant a future discussion on how our intelligence apparatus works and how to break that down and talk about expansion. So it's a good topic for the future. But I think with all this in mind, this allows us to sort of realize that the realization is potentially coming soon, either this year or in the next few. And at the same time, at least in Western Europe, there's the ongoing issue of bilateral agreements, which makes the NATO framework already stressful enough as it is, and that there is already an ongoing cooling of relations between Russia and China that I think will really begin to start bifurcating either towards the end of this year or in the years ahead. But speaking of the issue of color revolution, that's sort of the next thing that I wanted to talk about, because hybrid warfare is not going away anytime soon at all, especially when we're taking a look at the issues of what's currently happening in Kazakhstan. I'll be actually talking about that on Semiagog's channel this Wednesday on the 12th. But the fact of, disinformation, ideological warfare and more, these things are not going away anytime soon. And sort of the United States has been working on the issue of color revolution, as this picture I managed to find from a French breakdown on the discussion of color revolution had said. We've been doing it for various times in the Bush administration. We tried the revolution of the roses in Georgia, the tulip revolution in Kyrgyzstan, and then, of course, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and which later would be succeeded with, the Maidan protests in 2015, 2014. So as we can currently see them in action and the ongoing destructive force that they have, both as a stress of resources, but also to waste a large amount of political and strategic capital on focusing on these issues. I mean, even though Russia has secured a good chunk of, eastern Ukraine along with the Crimean Peninsula, it's still an area which, for now, over 5 years later, has been a significant thorn in the side of the Russian government, as well as something of focus for the Americans and the NATO allies that are in the region, all of which have been providing arms and aid to the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government. It is currently being used for, the disruption of strategic talks and the diversion of resources. I mean, to even just apply the current situation that is happening in Kazakhstan, right? This manages to happen days before the Russian government and the American government and their respective representatives of NATO and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Russian equivalent to NATO, the CSTO, are supposed to meet in Geneva for talks to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine. Because there has been troop buildup, there has been weapons deployments, there has been, more money being poured into this region, on top of the fact that you already had a very tense relationship between Poland and Belarus, wherein even during that migrant crisis, right, the Russians were ready to deploy troops. They were testing, the flights of nuclear-capable bombers. All of this shows that these kinds of color revolutions, the ability to instigate protests or fly people in to cause disruptions and to disseminate arms very quickly to, overpower police stations or, armed forces armories. This will be used definitely in the significant future. However, I do think that what we have seen, since this has been in practice now for over 15 years, is that, nations have wised up to it a little bit. It's a little easier now with the internet to sort of expose or to have people in there. And I mean, you can reference this even with Ukraine in 2015 about that discussion. In part because Peter Hitchens gives a very excellent lecture. He talks about the European Union mainly, but when discussing Ukraine, he had said that one of the most significant things that had happened after President Viktor Yanukovych was ousted, or he had fled the country, was that Senator John McCain and the Director of National Intelligence had both went to the country and started having conversations with individuals who were on there. So all of which, right, illustrates a significant issue of identifying these things. How transparent are they? And they will continue to be used, I think, in the near future. There's the ongoing sort of meme that you'll see is that anytime that you look at a foreign country that's having a protest, are the protest signs going to be within their native language, or are they in plain English for the, the internet and the media to see? All of which, right, put something in mind there in that relationship. But they will definitely be continued to use in the ongoing future. I think that you could argue what's happening in Kazakhstan is a color revolution. There's certainly documentation and evidence to point to it, especially when it comes to the relationship to the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Endowment for Democracy. And they've been doing that for quite some time, over 30 years. So more on that, though, however, on the 12th over at Semyagog's channel. But these things will continue on well into 2022. But as we've seen over the conversation of disinformation campaigns, whether it's buying crappy Facebook memes, that they say was this huge threat to democracy in the United States in 2016, of course, agitprop and various forms of, state and international media like Voice of America, for instance. These will be both used domestically on populations. We can already kind of see how that works now with the recent last 2 years, but they will also be on targeted countries. And this becomes a major area, right, that we've seen, out of various nations where, for instance, I believe in Hungary, Viktor Orban had kicked out certain aspects of, Western media in order to, make sure that there wasn't going to be reporting or agitation. The same thing had happened with President Lukashenko in Belarus. But the one thing that I do find particularly interesting is that since most of the information that we consume online, right, because the average age for people who discusses the media or takes a look at the press, like the person who average watches in MSNBC or Fox News, they say that the average watcher or viewer is somewhere in their 70s. They're not going to be, the primary people that you target to consume media. However, because the internet is going to be the primary medium of choice, you'd start targeting web traffic. And the real case study for this, and the reason why I have it on the slide, is about how China is to supersede this in usage, is that you kind of already have a case study from the very beginning in 2020 when sort of all of this virus situation started. because if you'll, for instance, the case study I'm trying to make a reference here is based on anyone's sort of like search history of topics and articles from r/world news or r/news, where for the first few weeks when this started becoming an international case and cases started spreading, there was numerous press articles stating how the Chinese knew about this. They didn't talk to the press. This delayed virus response. This was an issue that needed to be addressed and that the Chinese should be condemned. And then shortly after, about after March, April 2020, that began to change. And that the press articles were being used for praising China and their lockdowns, praising their response, the medications, the research that they're doing, their transparency, or how Chinese businesses were disseminating and donating PPE everywhere. It turned on a dime in a 180 shift. And I do think that as we continue to see it play out on Twitter with what's trending and what people are talking about, or on various other websites like Reddit or areas of high web traffic, that this is going to be continued to be used both internationally, but as well as domestically, because governments will always want to crack down on information, because while no regime lasts forever, every regime plans to last forever, as so its enemies does not think that it can just sit there and just wait for them to collapse. And so that's why you see it even here in the West about the usage of cracking down on disinformation. We see this on Twitter. These things are used domestically as well as internationally. And what is compounded with this, right, is the shutting off of the internet. There's been outages in Kazakhstan that talk about this, that are happening right now. We knew that this happened during the Arab Spring in Egypt, as well as in certain parts of Turkey during the alleged coup that took place against Erdogan in 2015. So these things regarding disinformation, access to media resources, and access to the internet are going to continue to be seen in widespread usage in 2022 and beyond. And I do think is the ongoing balance of power between Western media narratives and the Chinese that we will see an increase in its usage, especially from the People's Republic of China. But last but not least, in terms of hybrid conflict that I find particularly interesting, it's going to be the issue of demographics. We kind of already saw how this was being used as a weapon on the discussion regards to Belarus and Poland, that this was being used as sort of a weapon against the Polish and by extension NATO as a way to bring this area of attention away from Ukraine and move it towards the north. All of which, right, is considered to be a very effective way to cause tensions between the country, in part because you're using the sort of humanitarian side. We've already allowed people in there, all of which, right, has been used before. So why not take advantage of the humanitarian policies of the West and use it as political leverage against your enemies? And for instance, there was reports that, the Lukashenko Airlines and Air Egypt were having people in various parts of the Middle East, particularly that in Cairo, to pay them in order to come towards up to Belarus and try and get their way further into the West and into Germany. And while the Polish military had cracked down and set up a border wall, one of the things that I found that was interesting is that there was in Minsk in Belarus, is that there was quite a few camps that were already being formed with the push to say that we're trying to get to Germany, we're trying to get out there. But this isn't the only place that this is happening, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that Turkey uses this as well. Over the course of the last summer in 2021, you saw Ursula von Leyen, the European Union president, and her leadership, try to have conversations about EU integration, discussions of lifting of sanctions, as well as, of course, handling the migrant issue, which they already had a previous agreement on in 2018. All of which, right, is something that Erdogan has been able to flout and to flaunt, because this is something that he has available to him. There are roughly 4.5 million migrants from the Middle East and parts of Afghanistan, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, all of which have moved their way northward towards Turkey to get access to the Mediterranean, whether it's to try and go through Greece or to go through the Baltic states and to try and get themselves upwards to Germany, various migrant caravans. And the agreement that the European Union does have with Erdogan at the present moment is the discussion over the fact that, hey, we have 4.5 million people here, we're going to keep them. However, the European Union is to provide aid, and all of which has caused significant tensions between both the nation of Turkey and the European Union. But Erdogan has said that at any point in time, he could unleash the floodgates and let all 4.5 million of these migrants move into Europe. So the demographics as a weapon through migrant crises and the targeted moving of people, all of which, right, is going to be something that we do see in the future. He's pretty much holding the European Union ransom in order to get what he wants, while at the same time leveraging against NATO and the United States on the issues of like Russia and buying technology, all of which he has the capability now to more or less get the policy position that he wants. And it's, you know, you can call it extortion, you can call it ransom, but as we see the United States and we see the West, and particularly about policy, talk about, climate refugees or ongoing displacement, happening, that this will happen in the immediate future as well. And they don't even need to be armed, right? I mean, you could arm them if you want, but at the same time, by just unleashing them and having them force through Eastern Europe or go up through Greece is going to be a significant issue. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that we will see in the future, especially as more displacement happens, either through Western, specifically American involvement in the Middle East, or through other various means that are going to happen in sub-Saharan African conflicts. Joel Davis asks, so what's Prude's take on Western involvement in the Kazakhstan situation? I have read quite a few threads that may indicate some involvement, as well as there's been people being flown in from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. But Joel, I will be on Semyagog's channel on the 12th, this Wednesday, and we'll be talking about it more in depth, and you will get my take there. But I did a little hot take stream of it on David Carlson's stream, I believe on last Thursday. So, but you'll have my full take and my full breakdown of it on Wednesday, Joel. And hit me up on Telegram. I know that you wanted to talk about Wallerstein versus Mearsheimer, so let me know. But this is something that will continue in the future, is both an increased use of ideological and mimetic warfare, access to information, how op-eds are going to be written by people that are clearly aligned with various state and governmental interests, while at the same time, color revolution will continue to be used and evolved by the West, specifically the United States, while demographics will be used as a weapon. There will be more border crises. There will be more immigrants and people flown in, not necessarily through, the traditional ways of applying for asylum, but literally paying people to get on a plane, fly over here, sit on a fence, hold a sign in English, blow cigarette smoke into an infant's eye so they cry for the camera. These things, we'll continue to see them happen in 2022, and we will continue to see this happen well into the future, especially as the current government talks about, climate displacement, and there is a very high likelihood of increased conflict in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. So this allows us to move on to our next slide. So the question becomes, great power politics and the $64,000 question. So on here on the right is just a brief image, of course, of who is considered great powers. You have nuclear armed states, as well as those that are deeply aligned with these great powers as well, particularly the issues of Russia, China, and the United States, and European powers that are aligned or have an interest to change their alignment. So the United States will continue to pursue a strategy of containment in 2022 and beyond. Specifically, this has been in part because in 2011, the Obama administration made the well-known policy, the pivot to Asia. This was focusing on trade. This was focusing on increasing its diplomatic relations, but also to increase securitization of the South China Sea and improve its relationship with Taiwan for both diplomatic and strategic backing. So the United States finds itself in this policy of containment mainly in two fronts, mainly along the Eastern European situation, primarily along to contain Russia, as it tries to pursue either iridescent territorial claims or to, push back against NATO through economic means, primarily through, its vast amounts of resources and coal, liquid natural gas, and timber. So these are things that Russia has been using as a way to have, natural resource diplomacy. While at the same time, of course, China has its One Belt, One Road initiative, or the BRI nowadays as it's known, which I do think between their energy differences, because Russia does have liquid natural gas pipelines flowing into China from northern parts of the nation, as they try to transition towards nuclear and more self-reliant and more energy-independent ways, I do think that you'll see a somewhat of a drift between those two countries. And the reason why I say that you'll see a drift between them is because Russia does not wish to see itself as subservient to the Chinese. I think that the way to look at Russia is, at least from like the neoclassical realist perspective of Russia in foreign policy, where they see themselves as a civilizational state the same way that China does. And as China tries to pursue itself to be more energy independent, the economic interdependence between the two countries wane. And when there is an expectation that future trade between two countries decreases, the diplomatic and strategic tensions between those two countries do rise. If you're interested in talking about economic interdependence, we did cover it on a previous episode, so all the more reason to subscribe and tune in on Sundays. But along with that, their geopolitical interests do vary. They are united by the fact that over the course of the last 30 years, the United States has definitely pushed them towards that region to side with Chinese for strategic interests. And at the same time, these issues definitely do matter in regards to how long can that relationship last? While yes, the West and the United States may be somewhat opposed to them, I think the question, it will be cooperating at least until the issue of the United States changes its policy. They have a lot to gain from it, but I do think that we will see a cooling of that relationship, bilaterally between the two. But I do think that as long as the U.S. pursues its current policy, they'll probably stay more or less together. But these energy concerns may definitely highlight some of the greater problems underneath them economically. And that interdependence issue always raises the age-old question of, does interdependence, create conflict, or, it decreases it? And I think because there's a much larger elephant in the room, that of the United States, and its rather aggressive policy of containment, that for now they'll be aligned, but there will be economic tensions between the two, which may cause a drift apart, especially as the Belt and Road Initiative starts going into Eurasia, the Middle East, areas in which Russia has a keen interest, because there's the Eurasian Economic Union, of course, has the CSTO, and of course, China is sort of getting into there, which is something we'll be talking about on Wednesday, is that, for instance, Kazakhstan is both a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, but it's also a part of the Shanghai, economic organization, or cooperation organization, all of which, right, puts Chinese economic interests vested right in Russia's backyard. So while they're aligned right now strategically against the United States, I do think that we'll see, maybe in 2022, if not beyond, maybe some trends where they might drift apart on economic issues. And I think that's very important to pay attention to. But now it has the question that rises here about, the bargaining model of war in power transition theory. So if you're unfamiliar with these concepts in international relations, no worry, I'll try my best to give you a brief breakdown. Power transition theory was created by a guy named A.F.K. Organansky in 1954, which the basic aspect here was that when a great power notices that there is rising powers in states, there's a likelihood that they'll wish to contain that power. And in doing so, it raises the likelihood for conflict and war, such as how the British government perceived Germany to be a geopolitical and economic rising power and industrial powerhouse. In that way, in doing so, led, in parts to alliances and engaging in things in the First World War. But he also cites several throughout the course of the centuries past. The second thing to keep in mind is the bargaining model of conflict. So this comes from rational choice theory and James Fearden, where nations that are pursuing either territorial or economic interests, they have to calculate, is the cost of conflict going to pay me out more if I succeed in the probability of winning, or would it be better to just negotiate it and have a settlement of peace? And that question, I think, becomes a very interesting thing when you take a look at the changes in how states are handling governance, but also how states are looking at sovereignty. Lately, we have seen in Eastern Europe a significant pushback against, say, the European Union. Poland has set up a constitutional challenge to the European Union, saying that there's Polish law as supreme before the European Union's. And at the same time, we also have the question about globalization, supranational organizations, and their ability to influence policy. These non-governmental and international, non-governmental entities have the capacity to significantly have sway, especially because, global leaders attend them, whether it's the World Economic Forum, the ability for the IMF to be influenced by state actors in order to hand out funds for development or to democratize, all of which begs the question about, does the state pursue itself in its grand strategy to defend state and territorial sovereignty above all else? And I think, as we see a variety of government-funded non-governmental organizations that receive benefits from, say, USAID or the State Department, these things will continue for quite a bit of time in the future. And I think that you will see, especially now, with sort of the similar style of financial sort of imperialism coming out of the Chinese. Because, for instance, since 2009, I believe they've been the largest foreign direct investor in like the African continent writ large. I mean, they've even repoed the Entebbe airport, for instance. All of these things put it into perspective about the aspect of global power. Is it going to be more, similar forms of financial imperialism? While at the same time, there are numerous, companies that have similar powers equivalent to a state. There's been a wide array of concern from both the European Union, some very large, antitrust activists in the United States about the power that Google has over the web, the Amazon Web Service, AWS, and their customer base to influence American politics and by extension, a lot of foreign policy. These things have great importance to smaller states that may not have the capacity to fight back. We may see future coalitions of states fight back against these interests, but for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, like Ethiopia's half of their foreign debt goes to China. They have agreements with the Chinese about protecting infrastructure investment in those countries. All of which, puts them in a very weakened position because they can't say no due to finances without suffering significant economic downturn and collapse, while at the same time their infrastructure relies on that funding to continue. So we will continue to see a lot of these push and pull between the two states, whether it's state sovereignty and supranational international authority. And the supremacy of that kind of organizations. Will the concept of transnational legalism prevail? At least for now in the European Union, they've definitely, shown themselves to prove that it will. I think the Brexit situation is a prime example of this, where, the UK is basically taken to the woodshed about negotiating out there. I mean, you had Guy Verhofstadt try and interfere with their own democratic process by showing up to the Lib Dems political party conference, talking about a second referendum and staying in the European Union despite what the people had said. And it pretty much told a lot of anti-EU or, parties that wanted some kind of exit that you'll suffer a similar fate. So this ongoing tension between the international, authority, the transnational, the supranational authority will continue to butt heads with the idea of the nation state, and it will definitely continue. But the $64,000 question at the end is: do we see war, or does diplomacy prevail? And this is the reason why I brought up those two models in that theory earlier. Is that the growing concern about power transition theories that it was written at a time where the ability for kinetic warfare to exist, in at least with today's technology, was not written. And the idea of seeing actual state versus state actors engaging in war has not been seen, at least in our context, very recently. Yes, I mean, the United States went and fought the Iraqi government, and they took down the Iraqi security forces of Saddam Hussein, but that's not to the similar equivalency of, say, the United States going toe-to-toe with Russia, or trying to fight with, the Chinese over the defense of Taiwan. And these are questions that people like Dr. Sumantra Maitra have been asking. These are things that Michael Anton has been talking about, whether it's in Chronicles or with the Claremont Institute. These costs, I don't think, are realized by either side. And while there has been an increase of saber rattling, the hope is, and this is where we need to probably wait and see what happens on the 10th when they start engaging in these talks, is that will diplomacy prevail? Because, for instance, the last 30 years, the United States has been poking a nuclear arms bear and trying to make sure that they don't have access to Western Europe as an energy market. They've been propping up color revolutions in Eastern European states and within former Soviet republics in order to keep them politically distracted, as well as to have their militaries elsewhere. But the other thing comes in mind, of course, since 2008 with the invasion of Georgia, it kind of becomes very apparent that the worth of an American promise, at least in this government and how it's formed, is not as strong as it once was. And so the question becomes, do you call a bluff or do you engage in kinetic conflict? And my take for now, and this is something that I will hold myself to at the end of the year, I do hope, and it is my sincere position and analysis, that we will see diplomacy prevail out. I don't think either side is willing to engage in the probability and the idea of what that would cost for conflict. And that's where we're going to be at. So the $64,000 question for now is that, at least in the meantime, we will not see state-on-state actors fighting each other. We will see the continued use of proxy conflicts and frozen conflicts like we have seen in Syria and in eastern Ukraine. But along with this, as we talked about the rising form of multipolar world order and bilateral trade agreements and security pacts, this also means that nations are going to pursue their own interest. So expect ongoing trends of FDI, infrastructure, and trade agreements with South America and Africa to continue, especially from China. There's a lovely, graph and GIF that has the number one trade partner in the world from 1988 to 2018. And with that being said, it shifted from blue to red, so blue being the United States and red to China, to where now a majority of countries have China as their number one trading partner outside of, say, a few European states, primarily NATO nations. And one thing that I do expect you to see happen in these winds of change is that there will be a significant push in South America, I do think, for more anti-American involvement in the country. Especially because you have more left-leaning leaders that are expected to take power. For instance, the Mexican president, López Obrador, also AMLO, has been pushing for greater emphasis on the use of CELAC over the Organization of American States. The Organization of American States being an American-created organization to have diplomacy, a meeting, and discussion with all North, Central, and Latin and South American countries to sort of discuss and have these issues brought up. Whereas CELAC is the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, which includes Mexico, virtually all of the Caribbean nations, and South America, which is primarily more leftist in nature. And they are more anti-American, and they are more open to investment in from China and from the rest of the world. And the reason why I think that we'll see a significant increase in that in this year and in the next several years is that you've recently had the election in Chile with President Boric. He has yet to take office, but he's a 35-year-old millennial socialist who is more open to things like investment in China. They already have a significant trade agreement going on between them. They want greater Mercosur integration with Chinese investment. These things are going to continue. But along at the same time, as you see sort of this decrease in value of American funding or the American promise, that there's going to be an increased position about when do nations start taking a look at their own economic interests versus, their existing alliances and their ongoing trade between them. For instance, you're already seeing right now sort of, and I have a picture actually right here of a nuclear reactor, and I thought it's very fitting about this issue. And the reason why is because, for instance, for the last several years, courtesy of influence with former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, and the Russians pursuing this diplomatically about the creation of the Nord Stream pipelines. Now, the first one is up and operating. The second one, however, is completed. It could flow liquid natural gas right now as we speak into Germany if they so chose. But as pressure and sort of a response to the Russian government over the issues of Ukraine, based on American backing, they opted not to. And they had said, because certain members and charters of this organization are based in Switzerland and not Germany, we're not going to give them the sign-off. And so this is at the height of an energy crisis that most of Western Europe is seeing right now, and it's the middle of winter, all of which, right, is putting Germany in a very awkward position. And what has happened, very conveniently, right, as this happens, has been that the United States has deployed a fleet of about 155 American cargo ships to move towards Western Europe in various ports in order to give their own liquid natural gas to Western Europe. We covered this last episode where we brought out the deployments of these cargo ships, and these images were about from the 28th of December. So there was a lot going on, and so they should be there already. But these economic interests versus alliances are going to continuously push about, their need for natural resources, especially with the relationship between Russia and Germany, which is an area of interest that the United States does not want. They've been very adamant that they don't want a sort of German-Russian alliance, especially because that would, split American and NATO interests, right, between the eastern and western part of Europe, which is why that framework should probably be reformed. However, these appealing trade or investment areas will come at a significant cost. I know that someone in the chat had pointed out that, smaller countries in South America and Africa will have a choice between, say, Western-backed U.S. aid money or, investment from the Chinese, and you have to, deal with, the burgeoning issue with the yuan or, whatever it may be. And yeah, that trend will definitely continue, especially because China does have significant economic interests in in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in various parts of Central Africa, whether it's mining, whether it's telecommunications investment and banking, getting these nations to adopt their currency as their global reserve currency, all of which, right, puts them in that position to do it. But that also comes with the issue here, and Jay Enns asks or points out: is Germany pursuing its own interests by shutting down all of its nuclear power plants? I know recently they've shut down 3 of them. From my understanding, it was because they did reach the end of their operational life cycle, and they plan to shut down the last 3. And no, I don't think that's within their interest. But one, there's a lot of economic or political pressure and a lot of lobbying and special interest to be against nuclear power. And it usually gets emotionally fear-mongered as well about the problems of, 3 Mile Island, the issue of what happened during the Fukushima nuclear reactor, and of course, most importantly, the shadow of Chernobyl that lies overhead. But the German Green Party has been, that Merkel kind of tried to outflank them from the left electorally on the issue of nuclear power and pursuing renewable energy. And this is something that I think, and I have this actually literally in the next point, that will be taken advantage of. Especially because as the West, and this is primarily a Western thing, when we talk about reducing carbon emissions, we reduce or fighting climate change, whatever your take on it is, then this is what these governments are doing. These are what the state actors are doing. There are numerous white papers from both the American Department of Defense, the Ministry of Defense from the UK, and even the French have talked about it, where climate change will be an issue. And it will be an issue in mainly 2 areas: energy and the Arctic. And then we have an episode on the Arctic as well if you're interested. But I'll start off with energy. As you start pursuing energy and you're not addressing some of the root cause problems about who are the largest polluters or what is actually our issues, such as deforestation, our water supply being tainted either by various pharmaceuticals or by chemical pollutants, not to mention our ocean issues about biodiversity. The fact that those aren't being addressed and we're primarily focusing purely on the energy question is a problem. But the other, the caveat to that being that the nations that actually do pollute the most, i.e. like China, for instance, and larger businesses, that will still allow them to be taken advantage of because, nations like Russia and nations like China that utilize, fossil fuels, actual resources, will use that as political and economic leverage over Western states as they try to rely on forms of energy that the infrastructure for does not yet exist. And so, and in doing so, like Russia, for instance, has been doing this for years. Merkel has been moving to the left to outflank the Greens on the nuclear reactor issue, and so they're being shut down. While at the same time, for instance, you have the rivalry between France and Germany inside of the EU for leadership, and France is heavily reliant on nuclear reactors for energy. But what does that leave Germany for? It leaves them vulnerable to the economic whims and interests of, say, Russia and the United States. And we're seeing that play out right in front of our eyes right now. And that will continue, I think, well into 2022 and in the years beyond. So anything that is going to be heavily, autonomous will be an issue. And again, it goes back to the issue about like cybersecurity. How can this be hacked? I think that you will also see an increase of ransomware attacks on various forms of renewable infrastructure that'll be either sponsored by state governments or contracted out to them. While at the same time, this allows them to put more emphasis on liquid natural gas, oil, coal, especially as the winters in Europe are notoriously cold. And having lived there for several years growing up as a kid, I'm very glad I had a heater. And now, of course, we see a lot with those kind of articles where it's actually healthy for you to be cold. You don't need to have your heater on, which will play a significant role in the future in international relations and the way that you can economically put leverage on countries. And we'll see this especially in the meantime with Germany. So natural resource heavy states, and I tentatively will include the United States here because we do have a lot of environmental regulations on where to drill and where to mine. They will definitely have themselves being taken advantage of when it comes by their green energy policies. And for instance, the biggest one that you'll see right now is rare earth minerals, and with China, because they control roughly about 85% of the rare earth mineral market. And we're already seeing this issue play out with the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company moving out of Taiwan and moving their operations to the United States and Phoenix. And they're also primarily moving a good chunk of their policy or their operations and manufacturing into Japan. And they have about a 53% market share, right? So these things are going to play a huge role, especially as environmental regulations will play a factor for the West, both in this year and beyond. But last but certainly not least, I think the most important issue to talk about is the issue of arms races, deterrence, detection, and the focus over, of course, cybersecurity, infrastructure, espionage. But of course, the big ticket item that a lot of people like to talk about, and I think it's important for us to talk about, is the issue over hypersonic weapons. The Russians, the United States, and the Chinese are all various forms of testing scramjet, air breathing, air inhaling forms of ways to achieve a speed of Mach 5 or faster for the deployment of traditional kinetic weaponry. The reason why this increases the likelihood for the security dilemma, which the security dilemma is when there's the perceived idea that the nation next to you or a rival is increasing defense spending or increasing their military capability, that you have to do the same, in which can create tension if there's not direct lines of communication. And of course, the biggest issue with hypersonic weapons as they exist right now is the issue of early warning detection systems. Because there's been reports from the Department of Defense, there's been independent reports from the Ministry of Defense, when it comes to American technology and its capabilities, that American early warning systems for the detection of ICBMs or submarine-based nuclear missiles that currently exist cannot tell the difference and cannot detect the difference between an ICBM launch and that of a hypersonic weapon. Which is why you'll get press announcements about tests and things like that that currently exist right now, and that's a very terrifying thing to consider, especially because if you can't tell the difference between, say, a hypersonic a weapon that maybe is carrying a traditional explosive ordnance akin to a Tomahawk missile and that of an ICBM, the security dilemma increases, and that technology will have to be developed in turn. And in doing so, the risk for accident, the risk for misreading another nation's state comes along with that, which will significantly escalate tensions between these three nations as they try to maintain the ability to deter and provide deployment, which, of course, also changes the narrative and changes the concern over, the long-standing policy from the Bush administration onward about missile interceptions with the THAAD program that the United States operates, especially, but it gets tested in El Paso, Texas, that now moves all over the world for ballistic missile interception, which works on a relative degree of success, but we don't have anything at the point in time right now, at least to my knowledge, that can intercept something like a hypersonic missile. So these things significantly escalate the security dilemma, along with the fact that between the Trump administration and the responses from the Russians about, unilaterally withdrawing from a certain variety of, nuclear testing and, disarmament policies and treaties over the last several years. I think the last one was in 2018 with the Trump administration. That becomes another concern because now the existing legal framework and the existing diplomatic framework about nuclear weapons is now gone. And it will be something that of which anyone who has a actual brain in their head between their two ears should definitely be focusing on. And this is something that I'll be talking about at the event as well. But this is something that will definitely escalate the security dilemma because now you have some of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, Russia, China, and the United States, all of which are now without legal framework, without diplomatic framework, and are open to testing them again. So these are things that are definitely things that we'll see in the future. Pete Coring for $4.99 US. Thank you so much, Pete. To what extent have Anglosphere nations actually relocated their security resources towards internal threats, i.e., the biggest threat that they face? Rolls eyes. This is a good question because, a lot of the tech that we use for, policing language or censoring people in the United States, why bother, when you can have Twitter and Facebook and whatnot kind of already do the censoring for you and proliferate those ideas. The FBI has seen an increase in funding, I think, from the last budget bill that was passed in Congress, but I don't think that we're seeing too much actually being reallocated because you have that, in my perspective, the illusion of the public-private distinction sort of take care of that for you. This is kind of where the cathedral model is nice that Oren and I talk about, where it's nice to have other entities work and coordinate in an emergent fashion to sort of prevent that from happening. All of which, of course, is something to consider. But it doesn't mean that those resources aren't being reallocated here. It just means that virtually everything is an op. It's like that. practice good OPSEC, though. However, the other problem does exist about the issue of armaments testing and the security dilemma. These things are not going away, and we will see them be an issue as nations continue to fund and test hypersonic weaponry, because these threats do exist. And the fact is that our early warning detection systems don't really have the capability to tell the difference is scary. End of discussion there. It's something that will be a huge focus on in the year ahead. But this doesn't mean that cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and espionage will continue to proliferate. There was definitely something that happened with the issue of ransomware attacks. We saw them over our pipelines in the southern states or last year in 2021, all of which, right, will continue to proliferate, because if that infrastructure is weakened, or you have the ability to hold it ransom without data or funds being sent over, then your ability to have energy production can be weakened, electric infrastructure will be weakened, all of which, right, puts it in a position to, be taken advantage of. And we will see an increased amount of that in the future. And with espionage too, this becomes like with a great dilemma when it comes to, say, American policy on containment towards China, because they want to defend Taiwan. They want to contain the Chinese militarily. But at the same time, the American government has no problem with Confucius centers being built on its colleges. You literally had Stanford University talk about to Congress, hey, please don't investigate us, despite the fact that we have numerous instances of, the Chinese using American professors to either have technology sent over to them or have IP theft happen. These things are going to continue well into 2022 and beyond. But Suno Samar says, how long can these failing economies keep all of this high-tech production of weaponry? While I probably couldn't give you a really detailed answer here, Mr. Hamar, I know that Charlemagne put out a really good article on his Substack talking about how the economy is functioning here in the U.S., in regards to our debt problem. So there's a lot there to keep in mind about how our economic system has been divided more or less into both the physical market economy and then the world of where, money printer go burr. I would highly recommend that you read Charlemagne's Substack on that. I can probably give you a good answer. And as Steve points out, China is already ahead of us in AI research, according to that fact that the chief Air Force software official who retired last year, he had said that our defenses against things like cybersecurity or our advancements in AI research or our elementary school compared to what they're doing. And how well that can be played up, I'm not too sure. Like when you hear reports like that, considering how large the defense budget is, it does make you wonder, is this just a call for more money, or is this an actual, brazen security wake up and smell the roses moment? All of these things, right, have to keep up in mind. But these trends about infrastructure being attacked, cybersecurity, states subcontracting out cyber, attacks, or cyber privateers, is cyberpunk as that sound, right? Those things, I think, will definitely continue well into this year and beyond, along with the ongoing armament race over hypersonic weapons. But to bring us towards the end of today's lecture and its forecast into 2022 and beyond, unless there's a serious reassessment of U.S. grand strategy in the interim, either shifted by a departure of nations leaving organizations or by actual kinetic engagement, I don't think that the policy of containment is going to change anytime soon, which continues to escalate the problems that happen here as well. So, I think Pete had asked at the very beginning about security framework. This is my project for 2022, is to write out a sort of coherent alternative grand strategy. This is my book plan for the year. So this is what I'm working on as an actual IRL project, is a book talking about this. But unless there's a serious reassessment or readjustment, like that would cause a wake up and smell the roses moment and come to Jesus, like Germany saying, hey, we're actually going to go forward with this pipeline, or actual U.S. troops being attacked, then I don't see it actually happening. That they will change their ongoing policy. But the multipolar world order will continue to emerge, and it will force states to assess their needs, allegiances, both for economic relations as well as their security interests for state sovereignty. And we will continue to see the weaponization and the securitization of economic spaces, information infrastructure, and as well as how that information flows. So as we can see throughout these various trends in the terms of great power politics, there will be a greater emphasis on information technology, the ability to have deterrence, and using that economic pressure to change the balance of power in terms of alliances between nation states. So we will see these things happen into 2022 and beyond. And yeah, and Paul A, like you do have a point. I mentioned this earlier. Like, don't they always say that the USSR was a bigger threat than it actually was? And this is something that Barry Posen points out in his book Restraint. Paul he points this out as well, that like the USSR at no point in time had their GDP equal to ours. It was like a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of what they could spend on their military defenses and where they lagged behind. They didn't have the capabilities that we do. But now we exist in a world where China is equal economically to the United States for whatever measure that may mean to you. So things are definitely different. But at the same time, so many of them definitely like the idea of, saying these things out of fear and scaremongering in order to get more money and such. But at the same time, you are dealing with a vastly different rival in the USSR. So for those of you who have all tuned in from Oren's channel, and this is definitely a larger crowd than I usually get, so thank you so much for coming by. We're at the end, so what this means is that we're going to cover some channel announcements and a little bit of bookkeeping, and then I always like to end these lectures with a little bit of something a little more lighthearted. So if you're new, every end of the Sunday stream, we end on something called Frog of the Week, where we cover a different little amphibian, and you get a little bit of fun facts and a little bit of a nature show. So it's always not as dour and dire when we take a look at how the world's doing. So, a little bit of announcements. For those of you who already know, there's an ongoing art contest. I'm offering up 100 USD to sort of change the profile picture. I'd like to be a little less Edmund Burke and a little more something reflective to what I do. So, my channel is primarily oriented around international relations, politics, culture, and I also do a little bit of fishing. So, on my channel, there's a lot of fishing videos as well. So it'll run throughout January, and at the end of the month, I'll announce a winner. We'll do a cute little stream and just go through everything of the submissions, and the winner will receive 100 USD through various payment options of their choice. So if that's something that you're interested in, my channel email, you can find it here on YouTube, or you can DM me on Twitter at Mr. Prudentialist, and this is what you'll do. And I would love to see what you guys create. I've already gotten a couple of submissions that look really good. But some regular announcements. There'll be a video this week on the language of containment in foreign policy, especially out of the Americans. There's a really trashy Wall Street Journal op-ed I kind of want to lay into as well. And then there'll be an Odyssey exclusive the week after that, discussing the French philosopher Paul Virilio and the concept of the original accident. And then if you're a patron and on Subscribestar, what we have for you guys is that we do various movie nights once a month, and these films get reviewed, and we sort of talk about sort of the progressive or reactionary themes in them. So the movie Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, will hopefully have its first part reviewed coming out early in February. And then on the weekend of the 18th in February, for those of you who are unaware about sort of the shieldings groups and all that, AA's crowd, there'll be a speaking event in February. I will be there, Don the Pleb will be there, Semi-Agog, Turnip, and Radical Liberation will all be confirmed speakers. I think Charlemagne is a confirmed speaker as well. So if that's something that's interested to you, I'll put a link in the description for you all to see if that's interested for you. So there's definitely a lot for coming up for the channel, as well as just in general for so many people that are in our sort of spheres to begin with. So yeah, that's happening as well. And then on top of that, we also have the issue of my other channel appearances. So on January 12th, I'll be over on Semi-Agog's stream that evening to talk to Semi-Agog and Furious Pertinax from Apostolic Majesty's channel to talk about what's on earth is happening in Kazakhstan, because we've been going back and forth on a group chat, just sending each other articles and links and speculation. So that will be a very good stream. I love doing stuff with Semi-Agog and Furious, especially on geopolitics. We all really bounce off our ideas well together. And if you are a fan of Lambda's Bible studies, and I'll be over on his channel on the 20th, talking to Lambda on the issues of asceticism. And that'll be a very special one, because Lambda and I, of course, while we are both Christians, we attend different churches. I go to an Orthodox church, and I know that Lambda's a Protestant Christian. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which denomination, but I enjoy Lambda's streams talking about the Bible. He's a great guy, so it'll be a very fun time there. And then I noticed that Certain Event put out a $5 or £5, excuse me. €5, my bad. He says, I'm attempting to create a fusion between poetry and a video essay form. Come visit, very based content, support your local right-wing artists. Well, Certain Event is definitely up there with a variety of artists like Nullis Abramanski and Dora, who's on Twitter. So if you're a fan of art, and I think that the right definitely needs art and high culture, by all means, check them out. And thank you so much for the €5, friend. And yeah, I mean this is all that I have for you guys. And for the 20th, invite Patriarch, says Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker. Well, we will see. But all right, let's go. Let's head on now towards everyone's favorite part of the conclusion of the stream, which of course is the frog of the week. I wish that the audio would work. There we For those of you who are all new, this is what I do at the very end of the time, and today's frog of the week is going to be the blue-legged Mantella, Mantella expectata. It is native to the southern regions of the island of Madagascar, and it is considered a various subspecies of various other kinds of the Mantella family. It is well known for its silver-blue legs and its yellow backs and a black underbelly. And yes, Matt, that is the Chrono Trigger music for the Frogs theme. My good friend, Cyberpunk Internal Affairs, he has a YouTube channel where he does various stream intros and themes. He's done Semiagog's stream theme intro. He's done Apostolic Majesty's theme intro. And he's done this one for me, and I'm paying him to do a stream intro for myself for the future. So go check him out on YouTube. He's a fantastic guy, a fantastic artist, and yeah, go check him out. But for the blue leg Mantella, they are known, of course, for their wonderful bright-colored appearance and their bluish legs. They are listed, though, unfortunately, as a endangered species because of the fact, despite their bright colors, they're not all that poisonous on their skin. They are poisonous to eat. They are facing, of course, this to the problem of pet overcollection and habitat loss. They are very popular for the rare amphibian, sort of rare pet market, so definitely a problem. However, it is a diurnal frog, unlike quite a few that are very active in the evenings and the nighttime. They are active during the day, and they are primarily consistent of worms, flies, and other very small insects because they are a rather small frog, reaching about maybe to 2.5 inches in length from snout to the rear. But they do have a shorter lifespan than quite a few other frogs that are kept as pets. It averages around 3 years. And like most frogs, of course, they are sexually dimorphic, so the females are always going to be larger than the males, with a much smaller brood happening as well. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is this Sunday's frog of the week, the blue-legged Mantella. Can you lick it, though? I've been told that it's not poisonous to touch, but I could be wrong there. But I wouldn't recommend that you lick it or eat it, just because it's a bright-colored animal. Something tells me you probably shouldn't. Point of order, says Mongolian Doggerland. Is the frog of the week effective immediately, or are we given fair warning? The changeover occurring only at midnight. Also, can you confirm it's prescriptive and not retroactively descriptive? It is always on Sundays. It is always at the end of the stream, and you are not given any announcement. It's always this very special time because you never know what you're going to get next. But, always asking the important questions. So with that, we're at the end of the lecture, and if there's anything that you want to just hang out and discuss, as always, thank you to my top-tier patrons who donate $20 or more a month on Subscribestar. I don't keep a cent of this money. You guys take care of, my recording equipment. You guys have taken care of my, video editing software. I even pay for the StreamYard stuff, so I don't have that duck at the corner. And most importantly, you guys make sure I don't pay any out-of-pocket costs at all for my medications. So for those of you who are new, who came from Oren's channel, I recently had a kidney transplant a little over 6 months ago, and I take anti-rejection medication every day. You guys make sure I don't pay any out-of-pocket costs after insurance, and I cannot begin to express just how thankful I am for all of you. So thank you so much. But yeah, if there's any other questions, I can just hang out with you guys as well. Tom Nguyen asks your view on India and the role of the multipolar world since no one's talking about them. I think that India is probably moving closer and closer to the direction of the towards sort of that U.S. They're part of the Quad. They've been notified about the AUKUS agreement. However, China is well aware of that. They've engaged with some border skirmishes with them before in the past, leading to border security agreements. But there has been military buildup in the eastern provinces of China that do border India. So I think that it's been very clear that India is moving towards a more Western alignment. I mean, the State Department has always talked about the issue of India being the world's largest democracy. They've sided with Narendra Modi on some issues and have tried to court him in recent years. So I do think that we'll see India take a more pro-Western stance, both for historical reasons, but also because of a lot of American money in that area. However, they've also bought S-400, missiles from the Russians. So I do think that a lot's happening here. But yeah, Mr. Longy, thank you so much. I like to think that I'm a pretty decent guy. I have my faults and flaws, but I definitely try to improve upon them. Cringewalker says, I tragically can't super chat anymore until I set up an EU bank account. Apparently Google doesn't like using USD in the EU. Well, don't worry, Mr. Cringewalker. You've been more than a supporter here and all the other streams that we have. So I've seen you donate to virtually everybody in our circle. So I think it's okay. You're all right. You're a good man. But yeah, so this is what I do. And I know that we talked about January 6th over on Orange Stream. I have a video on that on my channel talking about political holidays, or holidays as I like to call them. So they'll all be in there. And yeah, and Juge is Dora on Twitter, and he does the art for my merch. So that lovely little frog of the week and various other mugs and things that are in the description, he's done the art for, and he's a fantastic guy if you get the chance to see the work that he's done. Charlemagne says, color revolution could be here, he thought. I've never been in this country before. There could be Americans anywhere. The cool wind felt good against his bare chest. I hate the CIA, he thought. That should be put on a damn t-shirt, Charlie, because that's so good. I love that green text so much. I think my favorite one was during the Rittenhouse trial, where it's like, there could be bingers here. And he continues with it saying, sweet dreams were made of these, reverberated his entire car, making it pulsate as the $9 wine circulated through his thick, powerful veins and washed away his merited fear of glowies after dark. Appreciate it, Charlie. They're already doing frog NFTs, Anakin Knight Cringewalker, and you can always just, of course, screenshot them, so don't worry about it. But yeah. Let's see. That's why I have no idea what this is in reference to, Doggerland. I think you're referring to the NFT stuff. But yeah. So for all of those of you who've tuned in, thank you so much. You guys have been great for coming on by. And just put some Fs in the chat, because Academic Agent had his Twitter nuked today. You can still find him on Telegram and Gab. I am also on Gab, Telegram, and elsewhere, and all links are in the link tree description down below. And if you're not subscribed to the channel already, by all means, please do. It helps me out, and be sure to like and subscribe for it, because that also helps with me algorithmically. So until next week, I'll have videos out, and we'll have more content to come in so many other places. I'll take care for you all, and see you all next time, and be prudent, everybody.